When folks picture childhood wounds, their thoughts race straight to the dramatic events, the heated arguments still ringing in your ears years later, the visible traces that anyone could spot and label, those clear-cut moments you could trace back and declare, "That's exactly when everything fractured inside me." Yet there exists another layer of pain that operates on a whole different level. It doesn't stem from actions that took place. Instead, it grows from the essential experiences that were simply never there. No steady arms held you close during those confusing sobs when even you couldn't name the reason. No gentle voice paused long enough to wonder what was stirring inside you and then actually stayed to hear the full reply. No caring reflection ever bounced your feelings back at you, teaching you how to trust them as genuine and important. This kind of emptiness creates no outward evidence. It plants something far more elusive, far tougher to identify or even put into words. And the young ones who navigate that quiet void rarely sense that anything feels missing. They adjust without question. They craft daily routines that appear, to everyone watching, as remarkable resilience, early maturity, or inspiring self-reliance. And they carry these patterns forward into adult years, completely unaware of the deeper roots they actually stem from. These were clever coping methods crafted by a small child learning how to want and need just a little bit less. Here on Mind Unchain, I want to walk through several of those common patterns with you. Not so you walk away feeling damaged or flawed, but because tracing them back to their true source marks the very first genuine move toward releasing what no longer protects you. Let's begin with the first pattern. You almost never reach out for support. The world around us celebrates this as pure independence. It showers you with praise for handling everything solo. You're the person who solves every puzzle without input, the one who weathers a private storm and never picks up the phone, the one who would cringe at the idea of openly admitting any task feels overwhelming on your own. On the surface, it screams capability and power. But inside, it tells a much more layered story. Picture a little one who repeatedly extends a hand for connection only to meet blank stares, busy distractions, or quick annoyance instead of warmth. The developing mind quietly runs the numbers, far beneath any spoken awareness. Reaching out equals likely disappointment, so the only safe path becomes becoming entirely self-contained. This isn't true independence at all. It's more like an invisible wall constructed to guard one particular ache. The ache of voicing a genuine requirement and then watching it linger unanswered. In adulthood, turning down offered hands isn't simply about strength or pride. It's a quiet shield against repeating that exact sting of vulnerability met with silence. The wall does its job of keeping harm at bay, yet it also seals connection outside. And the isolation it creates is something no amount of impressive solo achievement can ever truly mend. Now consider the second pattern. Emotions often feel like a foreign language to you. Someone inquires about your reaction to an event, and your thoughts simply empty out. Not because you're dodging the topic or guarding secrets, but because you honestly draw a blank on what's happening inside. Psychologists refer to this as alexithymia, a real gap separating the physical cues your body sends from your ability to notice and name them. Here's the way it usually takes shape. In nurturing early environments, caregivers serve as natural interpreters for those inner signals. A youngster bursts into tears, and a parent might respond with something like, "You seem really disappointed because things didn't turn out as you hoped." That simple naming performs quiet but powerful work. It links the raw bodily sensation to language, to something understandable that can be explored and gently worked through. But when feelings were brushed aside or viewed as bothersome interruptions, that helpful reflection never arrives. The emotions still surge, yet they remain unlabeled, unseen, and seemingly pointless. So the child gradually learns to tune out the inner signals, because paying attention to them only leads to more confusion and no relief. As a grown person, life can start to feel a step removed from your own heart. You observe others fully submersed in their joys and heartbreaks, and you quietly question what that full-color inner experience must be like. You aren't detached or superficial by nature. The wiring that should have connected sensation to clear words was gently interrupted long before you could realize it needed to stay intact. The third pattern shows up as over-explaining every single choice. You arrive a few minutes behind schedule and launch into a detailed timeline of the delay. You pick up an everyday item and immediately defend the reason behind the purchase to someone who never asked. You settle on a direction and instantly assemble evidence proving it was the smartest, most logical move possible. To outsiders, this reads as thoughtful care and responsibility. But its origins run much deeper and older. When a young person grows up where their wishes and choices weren't automatically valued, they absorb a powerful lesson. Any desire must come with proof. Any slip-up demands an airtight defense. Simply existing without a ready-made rationale for every preference opens the door to being overlooked or judged. So you train yourself to prepare the explanation ahead of time, to build the full case before any challenge arises, ensuring your decisions appear bulletproof the moment someone might question them. You aren't really addressing the person standing right there. You're still speaking to an echo from long ago, a caregiver who never offered the basic freedom to simply decide to want to take up room without first earning approval through perfect reasoning. Next comes the fourth pattern, apologizing for simply occupying space. You say sorry when another person bumps into you on the sidewalk. You preface a question in a group discussion with an apology for speaking up. You warn visitors about tiny imperfections in your living space before they've even crossed the threshold. Sorry. For situations that involve zero blame, for ordinary human moments, for the basic reality of being present, and occasionally requiring a bit of consideration from the world around you. This goes far beyond ordinary courtesy. It reflects what happens when a child absorbs, at the deepest unspoken level, that their very existence places a burden on others. If your early caregivers often seemed drained, distant, or otherwise preoccupied, you figured out that the safest strategy was to become smaller, to take up the least possible room, to become the easiest person in the house to care for, to avoid costing anyone energy they weren't already volunteering. Each automatic apology echoes the same quiet message. I'm sorry for wanting anything at all. I'm sorry for taking up any air here. It's the lingering voice of a child who learned, without any direct teaching, that their own requirements always ranked behind the comfort of the adult in charge. Let's pause right here for a second, because this next part matters deeply before we move forward. If any of these patterns feel uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear me clearly. There is absolutely nothing defective about you. There never has been. Your mind simply performed its most brilliant function. It observed the emotional climate it was born into and adapted with remarkable precision. It designed these strategies to keep you as secure and operational as possible when the situation demanded far more maturity than any child should ever have to provide. These weren't flaws in your character. They were brilliant survival mechanisms, and they succeeded. They carried you safely to this moment, but they were engineered for an earlier chapter that no longer exists, and continuing to drag that old weight into your present life is quietly robbing you of experiences you've always been worthy of receiving. Stay right here with me. The fifth pattern involves shape-shifting, depending on the company you keep. You possess an almost uncanny talent for reading the emotional temperature of any space. You detect subtle mood changes in others before they've even noticed them themselves. You effortlessly tweak your voice, your views, your entire way of showing up to align perfectly with whoever stands before you. On the outside, this talent looks like exceptional social skill. For those shaped by emotional absence, however, it's actually heightened alertness disguised as effortless charm. When home offered no steady emotional foundation, the child becomes highly trained at scanning the adults nearby. Not from casual interest, but from pure necessity. They had to forecast the room's safety level before deciding whether to speak, whether to risk expressing a need, whether the emotional ground felt steady enough to step forward. You learn to reflect others perfectly because claiming a steady identity of your own felt far too risky. Today, You navigate life with an extraordinary gift for helping people feel truly seen. Yet in those still solitary moments, the same quiet question often rises. Who am I when absolutely no one else is present to reflect? The difficulty in answering that question isn't mysterious at all. It flows directly from never having your own qualities and feelings consistently mirrored back during the crucial window when your sense of self was forming. The sixth pattern centers on struggling to trust your own perceptions. Did I phrase that comment poorly earlier? Are my friends genuinely fond of me, or merely putting up with my presence? Was that choice truly wise, or did I overlook something important? The inner questioning rarely quiets completely, whether the stakes feel minor or monumental. This pattern emerges when a child's lived experience is repeatedly contradicted by the very people meant to validate it. You voiced sadness and received, "You're not sad, you're just worn out." You shared something meaningful only to have it minimized, dismissed, or reframed as something else entirely. Over time, you concluded that your internal guidance system must be faulty. The messages coming from within couldn't be relied upon. So you began seeking outside approval to confirm that your own view of reality was accurate. That pattern doesn't fade when childhood ends. It trails into every important decision, every close relationship, every instance where you're asked to stand confidently on what you sense and know. Persistent self-questioning isn't simply a quirky personality feature. It represents the missing foundation every child requires to grow genuine self-assurance, a consistent caregiver who could affirm, "Yes, I notice the same thing you do. I trust what you're feeling. Your inner experience is completely valid." Finally, the seventh pattern. You serve as everyone else's anchor, yet fade away the moment you need support yourself. You're the friend people dial first in tough times, the natural counselor, the steady presence, the one who arrives, who truly listens, who helps shoulder loads that feel too heavy for others to carry alone. Yet when your own world tilts into crisis, you pull back and disappear. You skip reaching out entirely, you manage it solo, or you simply endure without resolution. Either path avoids asking anyone else to step in. This isn't rooted in stoic strength. It traces back to discovering, somewhere in your early years, that the surest way to earn warmth from caregivers was through usefulness rather than openness. Perhaps you stepped into a caretaker role for siblings or even a parent. Perhaps you noticed that offering emotional support earned approval, while expressing your own vulnerabilities triggered withdrawal. The lesson landed clearly. Your worth lives in what you provide, not in who you fundamentally are. This dynamic creates an existence that appears generous and giving from the outside, yet feels internally like an endless obligation you can never fully settle. Because accepting care doesn't register as love, it registers as something risky that will demand repayment. You brace for the hidden price. You convince yourself you haven't earned it. You search for ways to return the favor immediately or brush it aside completely. And so you move through even your closest connections carrying a deep, quiet solitude. Taken together, these patterns paint a clear picture, an independence that actually guards against future disappointment, a gentle emotional distance that formed when feelings went unanswered, over-explaining that grew from never receiving permission to simply exist without justification, endless apologies for the ordinary act of taking up room, a flexible self that adapts to every environment because a steady identity once felt unsafe, ongoing doubt in your own inner compass because it was so often contradicted, a generous spirit that struggles to receive because openness once carried hidden danger. None of these are defects or shortcomings. They aren't signs that something is inherently broken inside you. They represent the smart, logical adjustments made by a child who received less emotional nourishment than they needed and still found creative ways to keep moving forward. But the conditions that once required those adaptations have changed. The protective equipment you've worn for so many years is now quietly limiting the very things your heart has always longed for: authentic closeness, being fully witnessed in every part of yourself, and the simple freedom to hold needs without any trace of embarrassment. True movement toward healing rarely begins with some grand, sweeping change. It unfolds through small, almost unnoticed choices that feel surprisingly powerful. Choosing to state clearly, "I'd actually love the Italian restaurant tonight," instead of defaulting to "whatever you want is fine." Pausing a few extra seconds before apologizing for something that wasn't even your responsibility. Allowing another person to lend a hand with a task you could technically manage alone. These old patterns once served as protective armor, and that armor performed its job beautifully when you were far too young to have any other defense. You're completely allowed to feel gratitude for how well it served you back then. You're also allowed to set it down gently now. You're allowed to be fully visible, to be truly heard, to express needs that the people who care about you will welcome as opportunities. Chances to offer you the steady, loving attention you always deserved from the very start. You were never excessive. You were never insufficient. You were simply a child who deserved to be truly seen and valued. And that truth still holds today. So tell me in the comments, which of these patterns resonates most strongly with your own story? Because speaking its name out loud isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually the first brave step toward viewing yourself with the kindness and clarity someone should have offered you long ago. And if you know someone carrying these invisible layers without yet understanding their source, consider passing this along to them. Because simply seeing the full picture can open the door to everything changing for the better.